Welcome to the Iteration Point. I'm Michael Atkins. If you've ever thought about starting your own business, or if you're already running one and feel like you're just scrambling to keep up, today's conversation is for you. My guest is Russ Katzman, who runs Progeny Coaching and Consulting. He works with companies to figure out how to actually run a business while they're caught up in the daily scramble of trying to make ends meet. Russ started his career 30 years ago as an accountant, but wanted to know more about different aspects of the business. So he spent the next 20 years learning every part of how businesses actually work: sales, marketing, logistics, and eventually he became the head of strategy for a $2 billion company. What he found was that the smaller organizations he was coaching on the side were the ones that energized him. They were dynamic, they took his advice and ran with it, and they were hitting iteration points constantly. First employee, first dollar, first $1 million, where good coaching actually makes a huge difference. In this conversation, we'll talk about a simple exercise for figuring out what businesses you should actually start, why the human side of business is something AI can't replicate, and why sometimes you need someone who will tell you what you need to hear, not just what you want to hear. Let's get into it. All right, I'm really happy to have Russ Katzman on the Iteration Point, and I'd like to let him introduce himself and tell us a little bit about your journey, Russ.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Long time no see. Good to see you again.
Wow.
So I run a business coaching, executive coaching, leadership development firm called Progeny Coaching and Consulting. We work with everything from pre-revenue startups to a couple $100 million. Probably 80% of what I do is done with those in their first couple million, because it's such a dynamic time. And so many of those individuals that are in that space trying to figure out how to run a business, they're caught up in this scramble trying to make ends meet. And it just helps for them to have a coach or somebody on the outside to help them get through it.
Wow. So that's fantastic service. How did you get to start something like that? That's got to be quite a journey to get there.
I kind of evolved into this. One of the themes that I give to my clients is that we as business individuals, we need to give ourselves permission to evolve. A lot of times we start out at the beginning and we think we kind of know what we want, or we think we kind of know which way it's going to go. We don't. 30 years ago, I started as an accountant. Realized as good as I am with numbers, as much as I can do with accounting right now, even 30 years later, I was horrible as an accountant. It's because I just didn't think that way, right? I wanted to see things a little differently. I wanted to see more of the business. And so I spent, to your question, I spent the next 20 years trying to figure out any part of the business, all parts of the business: sales, logistics, marketing, HR, treasury, anything and everything that made up how a business works. Understand what makes them tick, what drives them, what motivates, and how are they incentivized, all of that kind of stuff. Mainly because I found that there's a good niche when you're sitting in a room with somebody that is trying to get something done in business and they're not sure how the other parts of the business are going to react to it. And so that's how it started. And I gradually became a bigger part of more and more organizations, moving up the ladder, ended up kind of the head of strategy for a $2 billion company. And I realized, something, these ones that I'm coaching on the side are eating this up. They love it. They're so much more dynamic. They take your advice and they soak it up like a sponge, and it makes it so much more fun to coach them. And so that's what I did. I switched in 2020. I rebranded to Progeny, and I switched my focus to be the smaller organizations.
So starting with those smaller organizations, then, is there something that they have in common that really, is it the size of the organization that really gives you a lot of energy to be able to work with them and make a big difference as they're growing? What is it about the companies at that kind of stage of their development?
I think, and this isn't just to tout your podcast, but I think if you go off iteration point and you go off what I call inflection points within the organization, there's so many more of them when they're a smaller business, right? It's the first logo, first branding, first name, first employee, the first dollar we bring in, all of those kind of things. We start to get past those first, and then it's the first 100,000, and it's the first million, and it's the first 10 million. And at every one of those, we kind of have to go through that whole Malcolm Gladwell thing of organization won't get you there. I think it was Gladwell. Wasn't he the one who wrote that?
It's the ability to pivot, and you can turn a small ship more easily, right?
Yes. But there's so many more of those when you're small organizations. It just makes it dynamic to be able to coach that, because once you've been through that with hundreds of entrepreneurs, now you can look back and what you're seeing is exactly what you expected to see at each phase. And so it provides me the ability to help them see things beyond their headlights.
Perspective that they may not have from their experience, but there's something that they have in their experience that drove them to go off and start this business, right? So how is it that you kind of help someone identify what it is that they're good at? Are you getting involved at that stage, kind of conceptual level?
Yeah, every once in a while I do. I get somebody to come to me. They're unhappy either in their current role, or unfortunately they got let go and they just don't want to go back to corporate America, so they want to start their own thing. Or, to Michael Gerber's E-Myth, maybe they're just really good at something and they're that technician who knows how to do something. They never planned to build a business out of it. And so what you get is most people will look at, what do I do well? And what do I do well that people are willing to pay for? There's an exercise a lot of times that I'll put people through, and it's not proprietary, so I don't mind sharing it here. But if you take a piece of paper, throw it landscape, and just put 3 columns on it. And in the first column, what do I do really well? And when something needs to get done, what is it that people come to me looking for? What am I world class at, if you will? Second column, what do I love? Not just what I love to do, but just what do I love? Trees, cars, attics, buildings, architecture, landscaping, take your pick, right? What are the things that I just love? They energize me. And the third column is a little more challenging. It's what is the combination of those two that people are willing to pay for? Let me give you an example. I had a woman that came to me once. She was an office manager, but she was a massage therapist on the side. And she wanted to build a business around the massage therapy. More specifically, she wanted to create kind of a hoteling space for holistic healers and massage therapists and that kind of stuff. And so we did. But when we went through this exercise, we found that one of the things she liked was attics, right? The top floor of buildings. For whatever reason, she just liked them. And so one of our discussions was exploring the idea of, okay, let's create this holistic space. But as you look at buildings, look at those with attics. Why? I don't know. Maybe we do hot yoga up there or hot massage therapy up there or something. But it brings together something she's really good at and something she enjoys.
Passionate about, right? So harnessing that passion, right, with something that people are willing to engage with you with, as in terms of like building a business. That's really fascinating. So if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're trying to figure out what it is that they could do to start something on their own, and you kind of walk through that exercise, right? What advice would you give them when they're thinking about that process and they're trying to take it to the next level? Then is there some guidance that you would start with?
The first place, and I'll start with the top mistake I see people make. And that is what we just said, is a lot of times they stop at that first column. They stop with what they do well, and they try to build a business around it. And what I've seen happen is you get people that get 10, 15, 20 years down the road running this business, and they look around and they realize they hate their customers. They don't like their clients. They don't like the people that are calling them up and asking for service or calling them up and asking for questions. And it's because they didn't design it around that first and say, who do I want to work with? What types of conversations do I want to have? If you start with your customer or your client and say, who is it that I want to help? Then ask, what are their needs? What are the jobs to put it in the whole business model canvas type of terminology? What are the jobs to be done by that role? Who is that individual I'm targeting? What are their jobs there? What are they trying to accomplish? If you then design a value proposition that meets as many of those as possible, if you've got a prospective client that has 10 different needs and you create a value proposition that meets 8 or 9 of those, you're going to be pretty valuable to them. And it's somebody that you care about their success. Don't go into, I'm really good at, in my case, I was really good with numbers, really good at accounting. I'm really good at accounting. I'm going to start an accounting firm. I wouldn't have enjoyed the work. I wouldn't have enjoyed the people. And so I think it's valuable to start with who are you trying to help and what are their needs, and then design a value proposition that meets those.
That's really insightful. I think that, your example of having that background, right, in accounting and understanding that if you had started an accounting firm, you wouldn't have really enjoyed the work you would have been doing. It didn't maybe offer enough breadth from what you're describing earlier of the things that really, drive you is understanding more of the breadth of the organization and how you might be able to, give some guidance on all those other aspects that are moving, because accounting firm is typically there for those that kind of niche of accounting, right? And useful and important for businesses to have that, but not necessarily what would drive you to be successful in that.
And I wouldn't have had the same passion for that I do in what I do today.
Yeah. That's awesome. So where as a company that you're working with is growing, where are the issues is there a common kind of theme around issues that they seem to, where they're hitting a wall and they need some assistance kind of moving to the next level or moving past that? Is there some, I know you work across a number of different kinds of businesses, right? So where are the commonalities?
It's tough. I've been trying for networking purposes and, trying to get referrals for years. I've been trying to narrow it down to, so what are the key points to refer me? And yeah, you just mentioned one, right? They're just trying to figure out what they want to do. Or they've got their first clients and, I now need to go from sales to delivering, and I've never really had to deliver before. Or vice versa, right? They know how to deliver, but I've never had to sell before. How do I ask for the sale? There's the first hire partnership, right? Some of them, hey, we were having burgers the other night and over napkins, we decided we're going to go into business together. Okay. Do you have an operating agreement? What's an operating agreement? Those beginning stages, right? Then there's the ones later on where they've been partners for 15, 20 years and realize they can't stand each other. Or one's been putting in all them for the last 5 years. One's been putting in all the money because they're keeping a full-time job to fund the venture. The other one's putting in sweat equity, not taking anything out of the business other than a salary, but they're doing all the work in it. And they're at 50. There's a lot of headbutting, right? First of all, to your entire audience, never go in business 50-50 with 50 on voting. It just doesn't go well. I've presided over too many business divorces where I've kicked people out of coaching sessions because they couldn't get along. If they dig in their heels and they care more about being right than they do the success of the business. And that happens sometimes.
It's a marriage in a lot of ways, right?
Very much a marriage. And I would tell you, it's almost as difficult to get out of as a marriage, if not worse. And that hence the operating agreement should have dissolution practice. How are we going to dissolve if or when that day comes? Who are we going to use as a mediator? How are we going to manage it? Organization.
Planning that in advance as you're getting started with that understanding that is a potential outcome.
Yes.
Could be really beneficial down the road.
Just like marriage, where the only outs are divorce and death, there's not many more outs when it comes to business dissolution either. So those are all inflection points that pop up, right? Other ones, sometimes people come to me and they've got all these ideas and they say, I'm not sure where to start. That's exciting, but the problem is when you get it in, and again, Michael Gerber's phrasing now, we go back to the entrepreneur, this person with all these ideas on how to innovate, but they don't know how to manage or they don't know how to execute, but they've got all these ideas. What you get is you get them trying to do 3 or 4 of them at once. Those are usually pretty easy individuals for me to find success with, because all we need to do is just take that energy from all 5 or 6 of those and just narrow focus. Organization. You get them focused on one and they take that drive full speed on one. Organization. And if you can harness that energy, that can be pretty powerful in building a business from scratch. So those are all places where a coach is inserted. I've told people for years, pretty much anybody could use a coach. It sounds self-serving, but honestly, it's really not. It's just, I've got one. I think everybody should, because there's things that you don't want to take home to your spouse or your loved one. You don't want to take on to the golf course with you if you want to go take a round on the weekend and just relax. There's a lot of things that live rent-free in your mind if you let it. And so having somebody to just bounce those ideas off of. Honestly, Michael, I came to this with 20 plus years of business experience, more certifications behind my name than I have letters in it, all of this business knowledge. And I thought, small business is going to eat this up. They're going to love this. They got all these different things that I can provide them. My Instagram handle is the Swiss Army Coach, because I have all these tools in the tool chest. Thought this is going to be great. They're going to love it.
Sure.
And more often than not, all they want is a sounding board, someone to talk to, somebody to bounce ideas off of.
Yeah. It's the business therapist approach.
It is, right? therapist. And if anybody knew what a business therapist was, I would call myself that. But it's truly that combination of life coaching and business coaching that an entrepreneur, or at least small business in general, it doesn't even have to be an entrepreneur. Small business executives, they need that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I see that in my history as well, where being able to apply the basics of, using a business model canvas, doing product management really at the smaller organizational level makes a ton of sense. But people don't really have those muscles necessarily to be able to enact that kind of process, because not everybody has lived that experience and have those tools in their tool belt, right? To your point. So being able to provide that as a service to folks that maybe need that third party that isn't in their business, right? But that can kind of look at it from the outside with fresh eyes, right? And give them some perspective that even if they're hearing it from their loved ones, it doesn't hit the same way, because it's somebody that has an arm's breadth relationship and a certain level of professionalism.
Yep.
It really makes a difference in how that lands, and getting them to open up and be honest with you about the challenges that they're facing is probably super gratifying, I would expect.
It is. I've said this before. I would do this for free if I could, right? Not quite to the point yet where I can do it for free, but I would. I love what I do. Unfortunately for my wife, I'll do it about as long as I can. So, over time, you'll probably reduce the number that you're doing it for. But, I just love doing it, because it is, if you get somebody who's coachable and somebody who's passionate about what they're building, you can truly see some progress in them. Because again, you just have to point them in the direction, cut them loose, right? Get them out of those barriers that are in their way. Sometimes that's in their own head, and sometimes it's in the business itself. And help them get on those barriers and to just cut them loose, because once they find that traction, sometimes it's as easy as a pricing conversation. And one of my greatest success stories is a guy who's making more money than he ever imagined before this, and it was all around pricing, right? Because it many times entrepreneurs are scared to charge enough for what they're really worth, and they go based on an hourly rate instead of the value they're providing. So they go hourly rate plus, I used to be getting paid $150,000 a year, so I'm probably worth $75 an hour plus, and I want to make a little on top of that. So maybe $90 an hour, as opposed to somebody who's looking at it saying, no, I'm worth $150 to $200 an hour. Doesn't matter what I was getting paid before. And I've had that conversation with them, right? About, well, when was the last time in your service, in your product business, when was the last time you were asked what you make an hour? Right? It's about the value that you provide. So underpricing is a huge conversation as well. And that just goes to confidence. When you get somebody who's been out there for a while, they start to build the confidence. Sometimes there's an ego involved in it too. Every once in a while, I get somebody, and not to say anything about certain professions, because I work with a lot of them, but sometimes very highly educated individuals in certain professions see themselves at a certain amount of money and then realize, I can't charge that right away.
Market isn't there for that until you develop your book of business, right? And have a track record.
Yeah.
You kind of work to that. Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. So it reminds me of a conversation that I had a couple of days ago about how do you determine the price of product that you're bringing on the market? And that's what you're really talking about here, is any kind of product, right? Like, how do you determine where it falls? And it comes back to the key part of that, right, is the value that it brings to who's buying it. And, because you've got all these calculations you could do to determine, right, like what's the minimum floor for a price in order to break even, right? And that's where you're, if you're working at $75 an hour, because that's what you were getting paid before. Well, that doesn't include all the other things then that are going to, be included if you're working in a business for yourself either, right? You've got higher taxes that you have to pay. You've got your health insurance premiums that, aren't subsidized by the organization. All of those factored in. And so it's really, you have to make sure you're comparing the whole stack of expenses, but then over and above that, what value is it that your customers are getting out of what you're providing? So that's really, really insightful.
Yeah. And especially in sometimes business service industries, get the project management, change management, sometimes HR services, sometimes even outsourced accounting, like a now CFO or something like that. A lot of times what those are based on is you're doing it outside instead of doing it internally. But either way, whether it's done internally or outside, they have to come to an ROI or they're not going to buy it at all. And it's hard to get an ROI proving a negative, right? How do I know this project wasn't going to go bad or was going to go bad, and now I add project management in and it doesn't go bad? Well, how can I prove the negative? It might have gone fine on its own. It might have hit the deadlines on its own. So did project management really add that? Did change management allow the people to come over to the project and adopt the change more readily, or would they have done it anyway?
It's very, very, very difficult to measure the success in real terms.
Yes.
With those kind of metrics. So what do you tell people when they come to you and they've got those kind of situations and they're worried about that penciling out? How do you kind of shift their mindset to think about that value more?
Well, part of it is in any of those spaces, including coaching. Part of it is we have to keep educating our market on a regular basis as to the value that we're providing. Right? I ran a team of project managers for one of my former organizations. And when I first took them over, fleet of project managers around the world. And I asked them, what do you do? What do you provide for the individuals? And I got take notes and schedule meetings. Project management, anybody out there listening knows project management's far more than that. And so when we did the first exercise we did, I brought them together and said, let's list out the ways we add value, right? And so all of those kind of ways they added value, from stakeholder management to removing barriers, which we just talked about, which risk management, budget management, all of those kind of things that they did that they didn't have front of mind. Those are the things that we have to educate the business about, organization, our clients, or our customers, right? Yeah. Any of those roles, it's all around helping people see beyond just the hours you're working on it, to the value and the risks that were avoided, or the costs that were avoided, or the individuals that were going to leave the organization that didn't. And so therefore, because we invested in those individuals, because we bought the outsourced leadership development classes to help those individuals progress to a better place.
Yeah. That's great. So in that mindset, especially, it struck me as you were talking about it. If you devalue some of those kind of, I won't call them soft skills, but it's those very precise things that we all bring to organization, to the operation, right? To the job. And if you only focus on something like taking notes and scheduling meetings, it's very dangerous, because that can very easily be automated away.
Yes.
And so, especially with the advent of AI and the proliferation of that right now, are you seeing your customers adopting AI to help augment their businesses in the net space? How prevalent is that currently?
Yeah, it's something I've been looking at. Gosh, I've seen it for almost a decade already. Because before AI, there was, automated structures that weren't called AI, right? It was process automation, it was robotic process automation, and then it was enterprise process automation. Now it's, AI, which is the same ideas, right? And if we truly look at AI, what it should be is taking those things off of us that are repetitive, that are needless, that we don't need to be a part of, and then using that to go with our own brain power to come up with a better solution, right? One makes three, not one half, because you take the person out of there, you go from having a person who has capability of growing theoretically, and you replace them with half a person, which is the AI that only handles, hopefully, only half their job. And there's so many different concerns out there. Well, AI is going to replace me. That if you are out there and you're in a role that you think AI can replace you, then you need to start looking at ways to add value that are not repetitive and mundane and could be replaced by AI. Or you just need to find yourself a role with an organization that believes in you and believes that you add value beyond AI.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty astute observation, is that we have to grow, right? There's a need to grow throughout our careers. And if you are stuck in, feel like you're stuck in a situation where you're just doing repetitive, tasks over and over again, that should be a signal, right? That you've got an opportunity to maybe, step into using AI to help manage those tasks and leaning into the stuff where you really truly add value. And so I think that introspection is hard for people because sometimes those repetitive things take up a lot of our energy, historically, in the corporate world. So figuring out how to, use AI and other tools, right, to kind of streamline that and lean into and get better at the stuff that is transformative and really adding additional value is something I think we're going to be seeing a lot of.
Let me give you an example. About 5 years ago, I hired an intern to work with me. And he's a fairly young kid. He had come out of my son's high school a couple of years ahead of him. They had an internship program, and he was only between his freshman and sophomore year, so he didn't have a ton of schooling. But I thought, there's some things I need done during the summer. And so I let him sit in on a couple of calls. And I remember us getting off the call, and we did a debrief. And he said, so, Mr. Russ, why wouldn't they do blah, 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 blah? And I'm like, you're exactly right. From a book standpoint, they should do this and this and this and this. And A, it said, is what I do really that simple. But B, it undercut the other half of that, which was the human side of it. I tell people all the time, we just talked about the BMC. I can explain any part of any business, any industry through a business model canvas. It's as simple as that. We can talk to any of them through a simple model like that. But then we get people involved. The drama, the challenges, the lack of motivation, the over-motivation, the overdrive, the underdrive, all of these things that make us human, the families that get influenced, right? The wake up on Monday morning, really don't feel like coming to work, but I do anyway. And so I make it miserable for everybody around me type of thing, right? And when you're in, we talked about small businesses versus larger ones, but when you're in those smaller businesses, of course, if you only got 5 employees, when 2 of them come in not ready to work, you've got an issue.
Yeah.
Even burnout, overwhelm, all of those kind of things, it's tough to ask AI to take care of burnout and overwhelm. It's not that I couldn't, but there's a lot of things that I do on a coaching standpoint that you could probably get AI to do. The human side of it, organization, where we still have the strength. And you're going to have that in a lot of these professions where, yes, AI can do a component of what I do, but there's always going to be that human piece that, we can replicate it, but at the end of the day, there's times people just want to talk to people.
I think there's an incredible amount of value that having someone with experience that is trustworthy on the other end of that conversation, right? That brings to the conversation that you're having and that you want to engage with, a professional for that. I don't know that I would trust AI to always be honest about, right? Because AI tends to be kind of sycophantic. They're very much telling you what you want to hear, which isn't always what you need to hear, right? Sometimes you need to have somebody calling you out on, where you're headed in the wrong direction. And, that kind of judgment, I think, is still not necessarily there in terms of, AI agents. I don't think consulting is going to be completely, outmoded because of AI anytime soon.
Probably not during my career, but I'm probably only around for another decade or so from that standpoint. But I love that word sycophantic because from my perspective, it's funny because sometimes I don't like to call myself a business coach because there's this connotation around it that's kind of what you get. You get somebody who's there to listen. You know what? Yeah, that's exactly what you should do with your business. Here's what you need to do for more profits. Everything comes back to profit and how we're going to change profit. And we're going to do this by 10%. By 10%, this by 10%. Oh, look, profit went up 50%. That's where we're headed. Well, that's not really true. That's not what all businesses need. A lot of times these coaches come at it, and I think you and I talked about this. It's like we get Michael 1 here and Michael 2 there on the same call at the exact same point in time, and one goes off and has a phone call, the other one goes off and answers an email. Now you're in 2 different places. Yeah. And depending upon what happens from that point forward, I can't give you some methodology and say this will get you where you need to go. Organization. You've got to be tailored and have a customized approach to your coaching. And so I think that's something that a lot of times, even you take AI out of it, even a lot of times with many coaches that are out there, that's what they do, right? And people ask you sometimes, what makes you different? I have no qualms in telling you I'm pretty damn direct. I'm going to tell you what you need to hear for your sake, whether it's what you want to hear or not. That's just something that it's tough to get AI or other
Organization.
automations, even decision models, even decision frameworks within the business, even hiring people around you. You've got to make sure that you've got people that will tell you what you need to hear, not just what you want to hear.
I love that. I think there needs to be more of that in the world. We need to be honest with each other, right? And because that's the world we live in. It's the real world. It's not we don't live in an AI engine
Organization.
so far that's been proven, right? So I think that's a great place to ask you. So if folks want to get in touch with you and take advantage of some of the coaching that you offer, well, how would they do that?
Well, the easiest way, you can grab my link tree at www.swissarmycoach.com. Simple as that. It'll take you to my LinkedIn or link tree page, and that'll get you. You can book a meeting there. You can read my book there. You can get on my podcast there. You can do all sorts of stuff, right? So that's my link page. The other thing, you can go out to Progeny CC, as in Progeny Coaching and Consulting, progenycc.com. You can find me out there.
Fantastic. We'll put links to those resources in the notes for the podcast as well. And I wanted to thank you for coming on. It's been such a great joy to be able to connect again and have this conversation.
Thank you, Michael. Good to see you, my friend.
All right. Take care. Russ shared a simple but powerful exercise during our conversation. Take a piece of paper and make 3 columns. First column, what are you world-class at doing? Second, what do you love? And third, this is the hard one, what's the combination of those two that people will actually pay for? It's a great framework whether you're thinking about starting a business or just figuring out your next move. If you want to work with Russ and learn more about what he does, visit SwissArmyCoach.com. You can book a meeting, read his book, check out his podcast, and more. You can also find him at ProgenyCC.com. I'll put links to both in the show notes. One thing that Russ said that really stuck with me was how AI can handle a lot of what we do, but there's always going to be a human piece, the drama, the motivation, the burnout, the Monday morning where you just don't feel like showing up. It's where people still have an edge. And in coaching especially, there's value in having someone experienced and trustworthy on the other end who will tell you what you need to hear, not just what you want to hear. Thanks for listening to The Iteration Point. New episodes drop every Tuesday. If this resonated with you, hit follow, and please share it with your network. You never know who may be thinking about starting something new, or who's already started something and could use some perspective. And if you've got a story about building something from scratch, visit theiterationpoint.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Michael Atkins. Talk to you next time.